welcome to everyone out there in metropolitan Boston. Once again, we are doing another session of Toward a Quality of Life. We are coming to you from the Roxbury studio of BNN TV at the Washington Street Mall in Roxbury. It is June 17th, a Wednesday evening at 6 p.m. in the year 1998. And as we speak to you on this occasion, the world is the same old place. We have plenty of difficulty. We have children killing each other. We have a president under attack to the extent that his wife and he can barely show their faces in public. We have an environment that is topsy-turvy. We have a nation that is at odds with each other and fractionated, and this is the world as it is with us tonight. Our topic tonight is further discussions of psychology and philosophy. Now today, in speaking of psychology, I'm going to somewhat pick up from some sessions that I've done with you in the past, in the recent past, at which time I was talking about psychology being a special science unto itself. That is to say, a science that is distinct from psychiatry and is also distinct from many of the so-called hard physical sciences and does not necessarily use them as a reference or a formula or prototype as to how its descriptions and laws, if you will, are to be written or known. That it is a special science unto itself, and that it's about everything we do, say, feel, know, want, have motivation for, and are organized around the intricate organization of what we are as people, of who we are as people, and how we are as people. I have explained in past sessions how psychology is not is not best known through a physical model, and is not built on a physical model, and by the same token, it is also not psychical. And I want to make this point rather clear, because a lot of so-called psychics are in the media, which getting people to phone them and so on, which has nothing to do with a science of psychology and knowing who you are. That is just some very fringe thing that doesn't properly belong in psychology whatsoever, and I'm not even going to investigate what that is about this evening, because it's a very special commercial kind of enterprise that is entirely separate and not at all part of a science or an endeavor that seeks to literally know and understand what people are, who they are, and what they are about. But there is a sense of the word psychic and psychical that means paranormal, in the sense of many things you may have heard about in your life, such as being able to move objects through space without touching them, just by psychokinetic energy, if you will, being a medium, or knowing of someone who might be proclaiming his or herself to be a medium, through which messages are sent or energies are channeled. Dreams can be considered rather psychical in the sense of the paranormal, and so on. And a lot of times, I bring this up because a lot of times I'm asked about this, people seem to be fascinated with the idea that something is paranormal, almost as though, well, this world is so not understandable and not doable, and definitely not the best of all possible worlds that we as human beings could imagine. So the idea that something is paranormal, that we could latch onto, that something is mystical and supernatural, if you will, eerie, probably is a reason for great appeal to many people. And I've not seen the television show called The X-Files, but I guess that deals with alien creatures coming to this earth. I'm not quite sure what it's about, and it has tremendous appeal to people. And some people are rather consumed by the idea that there may be extraterrestrial life, or that extraterrestrial life could come and try to conquer us and so on. Is it friendly? Is it? And I say, first of all, to concepts like whether there are so-called aliens, certainly there very well may be. Are there such things as mediums? In certain rare instances, there seems to be a decided case to be made for the fact that people can be channels or vehicles for phenomena that we cannot quite get a grip on in any sense or shape that we know about things in this world, and that perhaps there is such a thing as being able to use energy to heal and use energy to move objects. However, these are not things in my consideration that are extraordinary or worthy of becoming very engrossed in and mystified about, or sort of tipping the boat to one side by going overboard and just looking in that direction about life. These things may very well be, and we won't get into them today, but just because some of them may well be, and in most cases, certainly it's nothing but a ruse. But though in certain serious situations such things may exist, in fact there may be such a thing as ghosts, so to speak, in a way, this is no cause necessarily to find this so beyond belief that all of our effort and energy and attention would go towards that to the exclusion of all else. What is so important and what is so necessary and primary for us as human beings in this world as we know it is to address what we really are in our physical manifestation, in our mental manifestation, right between ourselves, in the flesh, in living color, so to speak. That is the big task before us, and this is where we should not be diverted, and this is something that we find so very hard to contend with. And this is what we may possibly be about in this world, and what we may possibly use and apply from psychology to help ourselves to be less barbaric. We should care less if people are out in the great galaxy somehow, when in fact we have such difficulty taking care of the one planet that we do know and have, and being kind to each other for the people that we are together. So why turn outward? Why go overboard into those kinds of interests? So yes, these things are there, and they are interesting, and they're worthy they're worthy of being considered, and they're worthy of being attended to, in balance with the fact that these and all other things coexist in space and time, and many things can exist in theory and in practice of which we aren't aware and could never possibly comprehend. That is the lot of our human condition. But it's also the lot of our human condition to avoid the gross tasks in front of us of getting along with each other and making some kind of livable place together right here and right now with each other. Now, similarly with psychology, and we talk about it and use words to describe what it is we're saying psychologically, it's important not only to not be physicalistic, as I've explained in previous times, of trying to measure everything, quantify everything, biologize it, give it something that you can relate to in biology or genetics, and therefore it's more real, to reduce it somehow to this. And I won't go into that line of thinking, but as much as it's important to not do that and to use descriptions that are specific to the behavior we see, think, and feel as we live and experience, that moves in time, that is evanescent, that keeps flowing logically, surely, almost predictably in a sense. Though life is full of contingencies we can never foresee, to be sure, and yet there are things about us that we can know and somewhat have an apprehension about, a comprehension about. And in speaking of psychology, of things psychologically in this sense, the behaving organisms, if you will, the living creatures, be they animal or human, be they amoebas for that matter, that are before us, in speaking of them and their ever-moving, changing, ephemeral thing, that is their behavior and responses, we also can't be too literalistic. We have to use a very precise and grounded language, first of all, but we also have to go towards an understanding. We have to take that language and filter and pull out of that language meta understandings that give us an apperception of what being alive and being a thinking, reasoning, feeling creature is all about. We also have to be very careful of knowing what our reasoning is, ever fastidious about it. We can't rely on things that feel easy, things that we're used to. We have to try to drop those kinds of backgrounds that we may bring to the table. We also have to look at our assumptions, always our assumptions in trying to reason. We have to know the assumptions on which we're basing what we're talking about. So we have to think long and hard of how it is and who we are when we're putting ourselves into the reasoning process, what kinds of hurts and backgrounds and easy kinds of thinkings we may be prone to that we would want to try to eliminate, and also we would want to try to have a logic when we speak, a logic that for certain, should we show any kinds of instances or statements or conditions that wouldn't fit what we are talking about, then this would already speak to the fact that perhaps logically what we're talking about is not as universal and complete and true, so to speak, or accurate as we may like it to be. We have to be very careful with our words, with our meanings, with the way we put our clauses together. Our language has to be ever so specific, because the datum of psychology is through language. The datum, so much great psychology, were you to understand what it is that human life is about, what makes people tick, how are they apt to behave, what kinds of gestalts and complexes and personality traits do they spin in, sort of, you know, like a top spins on the ground. People have clusters of patterns and traits that characterize them, and you can see so much of what the life is full of and the content of it and how it is organized and how it works if you read great works of literature, for example. That is one form of data of psychology. Of course, there are so many others, and as time goes on, we will be getting into them by and by. So the data of psychology is what you're really seeing and observing people, but then in observing it, you not only have a feeling of knowing it, you not only have just the raw apperception, but you also have a language for it. So the data of psychology is a language of description, not quantification and not physicality. Now, going back to the idea that we have assumptions, when we proceed in psychology and any science and any endeavor, when we're trying to think about something. Not when we're trying to sell something, not when we're trying to market something, but when we're trying to understand something for no other reason whatsoever except to understand it. When we do this, in psychology, we come to one of the assumptions, I have gone through several in the past, known as dualism. And you will find this in philosophy, you may find it in religion as well, biology, the idea that there is mind and there is body, and that the two are not one and the same thing, that mind and mental processes are somehow something separate from the body, and the body is just something physical, and the mental, almost back to what we were speaking about before, is rather almost a paranormal phenomenon. Some people have referred to it and criticized it as something you posit is inside a human being, like a ghost in a machine, that they're full of these things, but were you to look inside an actual physical human being, you would see nothing but the organ parts and anything else that is the physical part of being an organism. So the idea of mind and body, and as thinking progresses and also regresses, because some things that we think today have been thought already 2,000 years ago, 3,000 years ago, 100 years ago, and they come back into vogue with a different language, perhaps a little more high-tech, but the similar assumptions and philosophies come back into vogue. As the saying goes, there is nothing new under the sun, in a sense. But if you really think about it and observe a lot of things, a case can certainly be made for the idea that the mind is the body and the body is the mind. The mind is the body and the body is the mind. Now, that does not mean that were you to look inside the body you would find mind, but it means, in a sense, that you are a physical manifestation as a body of mind, and that things such as memories, desires, pains, angers, rages, thoughts, fears, run as much through your body as they do through your mind. For a case in point, let us think about the ever-exalted game of golf. Think of how, in perfecting one's stroke in a game of golf, one is not only learning mentally at a telekinetic level what to do with the ball and with the club, one is also learning at the peripheral level with one's limb. And in the limb and in the cells of those limbs are also memory traces in getting it just right, such that over time a habit is formed. A habit of movement patterns is formed, not only from the top but also right through all the tissue that is involved in the behavior. And so it goes with anything you do. Every moment, whatever you are, whatever you're doing at this very moment, is running through your entire body, in a sense that your body is the manifestation of you being alive, behaving, whether you're in a sleepy state or an active state, and all those processes are correlated with a physical reality. However, there's also a saying that what is mind never matter. And matter, of course, is anything that you can literally touch or know it is there by inference, by it being an obstruction in the way of a force. You know that there is matter as in something that has density to it in a real physical sense. Matter is the density of materials, really actual physical materials. So what is mind never matter, meaning that mind is not the same thing as just matter, even though mind is the body and body is the mind, because as far as we know, it's you in the flesh that is this representation of something that is a virtual mental process. And on the other hand, the saying says, what is matter, never mind, in the fact that matter is something that is alive and having energetic processes go on in it, which in and of themselves are rather mysterious, so to speak, that these energy processes occur even when we can identify the chemicals that are, so to speak, responsible for them. Where does the beginning energy start, and why does the energy seem to dissipate? And what is matter? Never mind, meaning that matter decays and becomes something else, totally unlike what it was, and that matter is not mind. Mind is not matter, and matter is not mind. So that while mind and body share an identity in that you are one and the same as a being, they do not share essence. They are not the same thing. The physical model, the fact that you have blood and cells, and that some cells are more involved in memory and others are in judgment, and some are involved in visual apperception of stimuli, and some are involved in responding to auditory cues in the environment. The fact that there is such a thing does not mean that those physical phenomena and your genes are the same thing as those phenomena themselves. Your behavior, your psychology, your makeup. And remember, when we talk about psychology, we're talking about all things that people say and do, and we're not talking about the very narrow sense in which that term is often used to apply to merely the so-called pathologies of life. Also, mind is body in another sense, and in so many senses. Think, for example, and this is true, think, for example, of people who have been known, and this is not to make it a fantastic story, just to make a point, people who have been known to be able to make a blister happen by going into their psyche and concentrating, of course, with an awful lot of dedication and mental discipline over time, into conditioning the mind and the body to exactly know the states in which it is and the different processes to be one and the same. Many of us, in fact, know very little about our bodies. We kind of ignore them. In fact, we ignore them a lot when we're in disease. We just want the disease to go away. We're not in sync with our body. We're at odds with our body. We may not be able to sleep. We're at odds with our body. We may be nervous. We're at odds with our own selves. We're not in harmony. But be that as it may, there are things that we can do that are physical that really are mental, and where is the line drawn? People have been known to be able to lower and raise their blood pressure. People have been known to be able to stop their heart for a certain period of time. Not a life-threatening period of time, but a time where by concentration they can stop the heart in a short space of time. How about people who can condition themselves to walk on hot coals? Coals that, were we to step on them, would just take the skin several degrees right off our feet. Instantly. People can walk on coals by conditioning. Is that merely conditioning the skin to be thick enough and charred enough to withstand it? No. These are mental processes. People who study the martial arts are conditioning their mental processes. The mind is the body, and the body is the mind, and all the senses become sharpened in sharpening the mind. So the mind is the body is the mind is a very curious phenomenon. How about people who can do, we don't even need, there are so many mundane things. For example, you may feel bored, you may wish time would pass, you may feel you've got a stomach ache, you may feel hungry, you may need to go to the refrigerator. Because you're uneasy, because there's nothing to really grab your attention, and then you may be in a circumstance where you're enjoying yourself, and time may fly. Why does time fly, and why does time drag? for example, and yet the same time presumably is the same time, but it's a mental phenomenon, isn't it? Yet, in a sense, the same amount of molecular exchanges, in a sense, should have happened over similar periods of times, but you could be altogether different. Also, think of people who are, these are notorious examples, people who are in combat or accident situations and have terrific wounds of the sort that will cause great pain, who manage to not be aware of those wounds or pain as long as an emergency situation exists, and then when they're able to fall back and relax or let go of having to just be in an alert situation, all of a sudden all the things that are hurting them come to their consciousness. Also, we know that people can be more prone to disease if they're under great stress, and that people have very many different ways of dealing with disease, that cultures have many different ways of dealing with disease. And when people from our culture or Western cultures visit cultures from other parts of the world, they often say there's a certain degree of healing going on with techniques that we would never use, and yet healing, some of them have been imported, some of them are taking root in this culture, such as notoriously acupuncture and Chinese medicine, and yet these have no basis from our point of view if one is to philosophically follow how they are derived and how they go about what they do, and yet things work out to a degree greater than chance, and something, yes, must be going on. There are entirely different kind of medical and spiritual ways of approaching problems, and what are problems also in the continents of Africa and South America, working to degrees greater than chance as well. In the Philippines, there is very different kind of medicine working in its degree. Also, sometimes when people have injury and it seems to be not a paramount or overwhelming injury, they may fall into a very true dilemma with the injury and become more or less handicapped, while someone who would have a much more serious kind of injury from which the prognoses are that he or she could not recover, may not only recover but may go on to greater physical and mental heights. So the mind is the body and the body is the mind, and exactly where these lines should be drawn or could be drawn is an ambiguous and interfacing, interchanging situation. However, let us not make the mistake of comparing apples and oranges and saying that what is the mind and what is behavior and what is our psyche and our state of being as we walk this earth. Let us not reduce it to or say that it is something cellular, that it is something genetic, that it is something quantifiable, because here you would be comparing apples and oranges. The phenomena of behavior are the phenomena of behavior, and the phenomena of the body are the phenomena of the body. You cannot reduce, you cannot have the essence of one equal the essence of another. You cannot go and take some blood or some tissue or some cells or some genes and look at them and say, here are memories, here are laughters, here's a person's personality. Even though you may say these are the sites where a lot of memory is stored, they do not share being the exact same thing. They are apples and oranges. The blood and the cells are the blood and the cells. The genes are the genes. The behavior is the behavior. As such, it's something entirely different. You cannot hook the blood and cells to a machine and have it produce the behavior. They are altogether different. So, in sum, and I'm going to go into some other things here before we close, in sum, psychology, once again, is a science unique to itself, not to be distorted or reduced as merely something biological that has to fit a biological or physical mold, not something to be thought of at the fringes of in the sense of things paranormal, not something to be thought of and stigmatized as something only for persons who are, so to speak, unstable, and it is our condition as humans that we would be stigmatizing and ridiculing of that situation. But psychology is something about our very behavior, our very life, every waking moment that uses words and language and apperception to understand and comprehend it, and uses a method of description, a very strict method of description. I would like to skip over from this part on psychology today to a few things that I think are important to make note of. I have many ideas in doing shows, not only in psychology and philosophy, but also in music, politics, economics, so many things. Questions that involve what our lives are about and things we should be throwing around and thinking about. On the other hand, there are certain themes that reappear and take center stage because they're so critical and that they preclude even having time to step back and try to analyze and discuss, learn and know and think about things, because all around us, things that are not good for our health and welfare in a very practical sense continue to occur and continue to seem to not have a platform to be brought to people's attention so that they too could be thought about and mulled around and talked about and acted upon thereby. When we have awareness, we have automatic action. It's only that which is dull to our senses, that which we do not know, that which we have denied, that which we're too busy for, that which we are dead to, so to speak, that can go full speed ahead and not change and oppress us, so to speak, become worse situations for us. The moment that we are aware, we even don't even need groups, organizations, or laws for that matter, because the more we become aware and think about things, the more these things appear to our consciousness, and as things appear to our consciousness and being in the psychology of our own lives, we act in accordance with them whether we realize it consciously or not. So the more we incorporate into who we are, what we think, those are the people that we become. And when we become those people, by thinking it through and evolving it on our own, we come to a new state of being. Now in this country, and in life in general, I should say at first, that before, historically, in this country and any country, life and one's psychology and the shape of things were something that a person and society should endure. Certainly religion has taught this to a great degree as well. In fact, we can think of situations in Latin America where persons who have who were leaders in the church, thought to act more vocally or practically on life, have been censured by the church because, for example, in the Catholic Church certainly, and in others, and in life, and historically in philosophy, we have this implicit idea that life is something we endure. And what I'm proposing and other people have proposed is that life is something to change, and that the same old, and not by violence, not by anger, but thinking through, taking a good look, a strict, stern, disciplined look, a naked look at where we are with each other and never letting go, not being diverted by so many fantasy kinds of games and shows that would take those are fine for relaxation, but topics that take one literally away from the life before us are certainly not in our best interest. And we've got to resolve so many things together. And as history would have it at this time in this country, there are very big battles taking shape. Boy, what a fragmented country we have as I speak with you tonight. We have issues of mental health, we have issues of health insurance, we have issues of being overworked, having flexibility at work, we have issues of where will our children be brought up properly. That responsibility to a great degree has kind of fallen down. We have concerns of how we will be educated, how we will afford things, how we will be able to accept each other, how we will stop having to attack. Isn't there any way we can address all these things without being in the attacking mode and being presumably morally, so to speak, superior to other walks of life, other points of view? And of course, our environment, which is in extremely critical shape. Those of you who know me know I speak often for animals who are in the laboratory and they're suffering, and this bothers me and conflicts me and destroys me more than anything, because animals are totally innocent and hapless and unable to help. Beyond that, the thing that upsets me so much, and I'm sure many other people, is how destroyed our environment is and continues to become. So we have so many battles taking shape, and we're not going to find out about them on the news, in the standard media fare. The international news we get, for example, is down 70%, I hear, in this time versus 10 years past. And if you listen to a lot of media, as I do, you will often notice, besides the homogenized way that things come across, that media persons who are on the carpet these days very much by a public that is, so to speak, cynical, are often of a projecting kind of motif where they throw right back at us, the viewing public, so to speak, the sins that they are being accused of, and pretty much in a way don't get it, as the saying goes, that a lot of what they're doing and the narrow slice they're presenting and the manners in which they are going about what they do, the gossip, the childishness, the to and fro, yakety yak, as elementary grade children would be doing with each other. Did you hear what this one? Now, nothing is serious. Nothing is occurring in the proper forums for it. The things of legal situation are not occurring in the courts. They're occurring in a tennis match. And when things happen, such as this recent, as we speak, we had the recent so-called leaking announcement of the independent counsel who's investigating our current president, Bill Clinton. An article has just come out in the last couple of days which points to the fact of how the independent counsel held meetings with people to inform them of what would be said and who would be witnesses in the grand jury. And instead of merely saying this is what happened at best, to just, no, it comes out as, now our president is one ahead because we've got something on the independent counsel. It's like 1 down, 2 to go. Bing, boom, tennis match. What kind of way is this to tell media? Who's ahead? This is literally how it's announced. Who's ahead, as though we were watching a basketball game. And you know something else regarding the media, which is why television like BNN is so important. We are not up for grabs. Our lives are not up for grabs, and people are allowing the lives to be up for grabs. If you come into a dilemma, if you come into a tragedy, your life can be soaked up like a sponge and then wrung out. We are not up for grabs to be mediatized. Our lives, we are not players in some dime novel. We are really living and walking in three-quarter time, to quote Jimmy Buffett once again. So we've got a lot to resolve. We've got to try to change the life we're living by reasonable means, by using the logic and capacity and knowledges that we really do have that sit on the shelf as we market ourselves into oblivion. And there are big battles, so let us get our heads square and pointed and directed. I also wanted to bring to your attention how many things are going by besides what I just pointed out in so many small ways every day that are changing the nature of our very life, such that we really are becoming robots in a computer corporate army of consumers. And we're too exhausted, too dull, and too denied. Oh, by the way, what do we go for if we don't go for all these things that impinge on the real guts of our life? What do we go for? We go for our rewards of sitting back and watching sports. We go for our rewards of buying sneakers. We go for our rewards of owning cars. We go for our rewards, robots that we be. Things are happening also, outrageous things, like the Federal Communications Commission recently, not too long ago, let pass with the giant telecommunications companies a ruling that they would have to pay local phone companies, they would have to pay them now a charge to have access to their local lines. This access is something that companies have had all along, but all of a sudden a ruling has come down that the local companies now can extract a charge. Not one time, but for every phone line in every month. I think it's 53 cents. And this in turn, by and large, is being passed on to you, the consumer. All of a sudden, a ruling like this can be made. And 53 cents from every man, woman, or child that pays a phone bill every month is a lot of money. And it's a lot of money to you or me. Another thing was Congress, in its passing of a telecommunication bill, said that some of the long-distance charges would be going to subsidize internets in the classroom. A laudable idea, to be sure, but one would say, how is it they're finding these creative, shall we call them, ways to be doing what should be government business, if you will? And the reason this was passed through this way was with the telecommunications bill, so much money was saved to companies in some of the stipulations of the bill that it more than made up for any charges that they were going to have to be contributing to this internet. But rather than balance it out with the savings that they got by this bill being put into effect, they took the charge for the internet and are passing it on again into the phone bills, adding that as a cost to the individual consumer. Let's look at an electric bill. I look at an electric bill and it's hard for me to see in the lights I have here, and they're supposed to itemize now as would be their answer to me, but there are charges like energy conservation charge, a renewable energy charge, of which is being itemized on your bill, and they may say, well, those were always there. Why are these charges becoming part of your bill? Why are they even there to begin with? And won't more be coming on? And are you reading your bills? And are you even able to understand what these charges represent? And why are these companies able to put these charges on you should there not be competition where other companies that are not these same companies are researching and making their way to become the people who will provide you with renewable energy and new kinds of energies, instead of you having to fund this and fund the companies that are not in those modalities right now and take on all that extra burden. Just like in a certain state, I don't know how the vote turned out, there was a vote of whether consumers were going to have to pick up the tab for the failed nuclear power enterprises of a particular utility company. So these kinds of things are happening, and you just sit there going, moo. You just sit there. Perhaps, maybe yes, maybe no. These are the things to be paying attention to. Now this is going to be science fiction. You want to know about aliens, you want to know about psychokinesis, you want to know about paranormal. I have a paranormal fact for you. The week of June 8th, I read this in a reputable over-the-wire news source. The Senate voted 50 to 45 to reject an amendment to the tobacco bill, which at this time has failed, which would put the cap for hourly fees of the lawyers who are on the suing side of the tobacco situation at $1,000 per hour, the ones who are suing tobacco companies. That is paranormal. Bankruptcies, there's currently hot debate going on in your Congress to make it virtually too difficult for people of small middle means to file bankruptcy, but not any more difficult for persons of more than middle means to file bankruptcy. Here's something paranormal for you. If you want the extreme, if you like the X-Files and The Edge, it was ruled in this country, and it may well have been the Supreme Court, someone can call me and tell me, that cable is not obliged to carry so-called fringe candidates for public office if they are not quote-unquote newsworthy. People who have filed their papers, gotten their signatures, and are official candidates do not have to be carried by cable stations in political contests because they may not be newsworthy. We at BNN are part of a fading frontier. Please keep the prairie open. Now, what about savage weather, the environment? Have you had enough savage weather? As I speak to you on June 17th in 1998, we have had terrible weather. There are bad floods in Iowa. There is extreme heat in Florida and dryness and smoke. What happens? Never mind the people. What about the hapless animals? What about all the baby birds caught in those trees that can't fly? What about alligators all in the smoke? What about all that destruction of life in Florida going on? What about Texas that has had record-breaking heats that are barely survivable? What about that today there was a snow warning, unusual, quote-unquote, in the Rocky Mountains? What about houses again underwater in Iowa? What about our unabated rain? Are you ready to know? Are you ready to be aware and not be depressed? Be thinking to know that we are destroying. We are not only getting global warming, we will get global warming, we will get global freezing. And radiation in the atmosphere, ionizing molecules that cause patterns of atmospheric exchange that are abnormal. The things we are doing as technology and industry are savaging savaging our environment? Are you ready to think that perhaps we are savaging our environment? Now let me show you another thing here. We have a couple of minutes. I'd like to show you, yesterday I can't eat most nectarines and peaches. First of all, they're very pesticided, and I do have to eat pesticided fruit, as do you, because that's the way it goes. And I happen to get these even though I didn't purchase them for myself, and I tried one. But if they look like this, which is normal for how they look, and they're sold at a very high price per pound, they're really not edible, and they're really not good for you, and I don't know how many people do digest them. But let's look. This is 1 day old, so a little bit brown over here. But when I opened it, it was like this. And this is a nectarine. When I looked inside, the color of the stone was this color brown that you see it now. This is not normal fruit. Many of you may not be old enough to know that a stone inside a nectarine or peach should have a certain nice medium brown clean color. It was this dirty brown residue. And lo and behold, that bitter part that is the seed inside was just like I'm showing you now, puffy and soft. This is already a fruit that is in trouble, and a fruit that is trouble for you to eat. And yet we must eat these things. These are the diet that we have. Then there was the peach. And ordinarily, I could never buy a peach like that. And where do you find a good peach? Mostly you don't. You see, it's really not ripened properly anyway, and it's too old. But I took a quick bite of it anyway, and what did I find? What you probably find a lot. Mush. Absolute dry mush. Can you see that mush? Can you get in on that mush? Just like a sawdust mush. And we could go on. I wanted to point this out to you because there's so many things that you can know about what's going on with the environment, what's going on with the food you eat, what's going on with cancer, what's going on with your health, what's going on around you without being a chemist, without being a biologist. There's so many things you can look around, waken your senses, be attuned to, and just be someone who is in this life fully and loving it. So much going on with the food. Irradiated food, pesticided food, growth factors in the food, genetically engineered food. What have you got? As one of my songs says, garbage, poison. You can find all these things out yourself. Finally, we always say something for children and animals. Children are very angry. I heard a psychologist saying today that not only are their pathologies more serious, they're also happening at younger ages. And if you really think about children, how can they be left alone directionless? How can they be without meaning and meaningful connection and contact on a consistent basis throughout the day, throughout the week? Think about that. How could they get by, even if they manage to become somewhat normal? Imagine the growing pains and extra loneliness they have by being like a ship or a sailboat without a rudder. I hear people say, let's work on their anger. Let's not work on their anger. Let's work on love, empathy, interest, communication as a prelude to the abyss. Let's not have them in situations where they are becoming angry monsters. Let's be in contact and love and communication with them, not because it's good, but because that's the way it is. Let us be in sync with our children and give them the meaning and the life of being with us and of us and part of it, so that they grow up with their lifehood intact too. Also, remember please, the animals who are in the laboratory and they suffer so very badly. They suffer every day, and were you to see it, you would be very dismayed indeed. So please remember the animals and the great suffering that they endure. Thank you. Good luck to you. Good health to you. Let's live. Let's have fun. Let's get down. Let's be in sync. Good night.
matter what